I stood at the edge of the packed gymnasium, gripping my coffee cup too tightly as my sister Miranda's voice carried over the crowd. "So proud to welcome my little sister Eliza," she announced to her wealthy donors, her smile never reaching. Her eyes. She's always been resourceful, making ends meet however she can. The subtle emphasis made my stomach twist. Several women in designer outfits glanced my way with practiced sympathy. My 14-year-old daughter Zoe squeezed my hand, her eyes flashing with a determination I recognized. "Mom," she whispered, "I can't listen to this anymore." Before I could stop her, she was striding toward the stage, toward the microphone, toward the truth I'd spent years hiding from my family. The room went silent as my daughter reached for the podium. That's when I realized 15 years of carefully constructed secrets were about to collapse around me. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Preparing. And narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I never wanted to attend Miranda's fundraiser in the first place. The invitation arrived on heavy cardstock, embossed with the private academy's logo where Miranda served as board president. Annual Donors Appreciation. Gala and Silent Auction, it read, followed by a handwritten note. Eliza, would be nice to show family support. Everyone's curious what you've been up to all these years. Don't worry, dress code is smart casual, so whatever you have should be fine. The condescension wasn't subtle, but I was used to it. Miranda had spent our entire adult lives painting herself as the successful sister and me as the cautionary tale. In her carefully crafted narrative, I was the college dropout who disappeared to find myself and ended up struggling as a single mother with odd jobs. She never actually asked about my life, and I never corrected her assumptions. The distance between us made it easy. But this time was different. This time, Miranda had specifically requested I bring Zoe. The donors love hearing about our scholarship program for underprivileged families, she had said over the phone. Your situation really drives home the importance of our work. I nearly hung up then, but something stopped me. Perhaps it was time to face my sister after all these years. Maybe it was Zoe's persistent questions about our family. Whatever the reason, I found myself agreeing, though my stomach knotted at the thought. As we drove to Miranda's affluent suburb of Oak Ridge Hills, Zoe fidgeted with her carefully chosen outfit. "Mom, why don't we ever visit Aunt Miranda? Or why doesn't she visit us?" I kept my eyes on the road. Different lives, different priorities. Is it because we don't have money like she does? Zoe asked, her perception cutting straight to what she thought was the heart of the matter. I smiled slightly. Money's part of it, but it's more complicated. Your aunt and we see the world differently. Zoe nodded, though I could tell she wasn't satisfied with my answer. She'd always been perceptive, sometimes uncomfortably so, noticing things most teenagers wouldn't. I'd tried to shield her from family politics, but at 14 she was piecing things together on her own. As we pulled into the academy's massive parking lot, I felt woefully out of place among the luxury cars. My reliable but aging Subaru, while perfect for our needs, seemed to announce our outsider status. I reminded myself that appearances meant nothing. I knew the truth about my life, even if my family didn't. The gymnasium had been transformed with twinkling lights, linen-covered tables, and flower arrangements that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Miranda spotted us immediately, gliding over in her tailored pantsuit, diamond studs catching the light. "You made it!" she exclaimed, air kissing my cheek. She turned to Zoe, genuine warmth entering her voice for the first time. "And look at you, all grown up and so pretty." Zoe, to her credit, smiled politely. "Thank you for inviting us, Aunt Miranda." Miranda steered us through the crowd, introducing us to various board members and donors. With each introduction, the subtle digs accumulated. "This is my sister Eliza. She lives in that artistic community downtown. Eliza's always taken the road less traveled. Zoe is so bright. She gets that from our side of the family." I smiled through clenched teeth, letting the remarks slide off me like I'd practiced for years. This wasn't about me. I was here for Zoe, who deserved to know her extended family, complicated as they were. The event proceeded predictably until Miranda took the stage to thank her donors. I should have known she would use us as props. I should have prepared Zoe for the possibility. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened next. "Family means everything to me," Miranda was saying, her voice amplified through the sound system. "My own sister's struggles have inspired our scholarship program. Not everyone has the advantages we've been blessed with." I felt myself shrinking into my seat as dozens of eyes turned toward me. Miranda continued, her voice dripping with performative compassion. "Eliza has always taken the unconventional path. While I was finishing my MBA and building my consulting firm, she was exploring other options." Light laughter rippled through the audience. "But she's managed to raise an amazing daughter despite the challenges of unstable employment and limited resources." Zoe stiffened beside me. I placed a gentle hand on her arm, silently pleading for patience. Just a few more minutes and we could leave, never to return. But Miranda wasn't finished. "This is why I'm so passionate about educational opportunities for all. Not everyone can achieve conventional success, but everyone deserves a chance." The room applauded. I kept my expression neutral, though inside I was seething. 15 years of letting Miranda believe what she wanted about my life suddenly felt less like taking the high road and more like cowardice. That's when Zoe stood up. "Sweetie, what are you doing?" I whispered, attempting to pull her back into her seat. She shook off my hand. "I can't listen to this anymore, Mom. It's not right." Before I could stop her, she was marching toward the stage with the determined stride she'd inherited from me. Miranda's smile faltered as Zoe approached the podium. It seems my niece has something to add," Miranda said, awkwardly stepping aside as Zoe reached for the microphone. The room went silent. I held my breath. "Hi, everyone," Zoe began, her voice surprisingly steady. "I'm Zoe Chen. Thank you for having us tonight. I just wanted to clear up a few things about my mom." I closed my eyes briefly. This was it. The moment my carefully constructed wall between worlds was about to crumble. My aunt mentioned my mom taking the unconventional path, and that's true, Zoe continued. But what she didn't mention is that my mom, Eliza Chen, is actually Dr. Eliza Chen. A murmur went through the crowd. Miranda's expression froze. "My mom has a PhD in computer science and artificial intelligence from Stanford. She doesn't talk about it much because she says titles aren't important. But I think tonight they kind of are." I could see Miranda's eyes widening as she tried to process this information, tried to reconcile it with the narrative she'd constructed over the years. "My mom doesn't work odd jobs," Zoe continued. "She's the founder and chief architect of Privacy Shield AI. You might not know the company name, but if you use any major social media platform, banking app, or healthcare system, you're protected by her security protocols." The murmuring grew louder. I noticed several people pulling out their phones, undoubtedly searching for information about me and my company. "Mom keeps a low profile on purpose. She believes in the work, not the recognition. But I don't think it's fair for her to be used as an example of struggle when she's actually helped millions of people protect their digital privacy and security." Miranda stepped forward, trying to regain control of the situation. "Well, this is quite a revelation. Eliza, you never mentioned—" But Zoe wasn't finished. "Last month, my mom's company was acquired for $800 million. She's donating half to digital literacy programs in underserved communities. The other half goes to a foundation that helps women in tech. The room erupted in gasps and whispers. Miranda stood frozen, her perfect narrative shattered. So, while I appreciate the concern about educational opportunities, Zoe concluded, I'm actually attending public school by choice. Mom believes in public education and says real privilege is being able to choose your path instead of having it chosen for you. With that, she handed the microphone back to Miranda and walked calmly back to our table. The room erupted in applause, genuine this time, not the polite kind that had followed Miranda's speech. I sat in shock, a mix of pride and panic washing over me. Zoe had just exposed everything I'd kept hidden from my family for years. I never wanted recognition. I never wanted my success to be measured in dollars or status. But I also never wanted to be Miranda's cautionary tale, her charity case. As Zoe sat down beside me, I leaned close and whispered, We need to talk about boundaries and privacy when we get home. She grinned, unrepentant. They needed to know who you really are, Mom. And as I looked around at the stunned faces, at Miranda's shattered composure, at the admiration replacing the pity in strangers' eyes, I realized that perhaps it was time the truth came out. Not for validation, not for status, but because living authentically might be the most important lesson I could teach my daughter. Miranda stumbled through the remainder of her speech before practically running off the stage. The room buzzed with excitement, and suddenly people who had barely glanced at me earlier were making their way to our table. Dr. Chen, I had no idea. Privacy Shield changed how our hospital protects patient data. My daughter wants to study computer science too. I answered politely but briefly, uncomfortable with the attention. This was exactly why I kept my professional life separate from family gatherings. Success, to me, had never been about recognition or status. It was about the impact of my work, about creating something meaningful while still having time to raise my daughter. When Miranda finally approached our table, her face was a careful mask. Eliza, can we speak privately? I nodded, following her to a quiet corner near the emergency exit. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence between us was heavy with 15 years of assumptions, judgments, and unspoken truths. Why didn't you tell me? She finally asked, her voice smaller than I'd heard it in years. I met her gaze steadily. Would you have believed me if I had? She flinched slightly, but didn't deny it. All these years. You thought what you wanted to think, I said, not unkindly. You needed me to be the struggling sister so you could be the successful one. That's not fair, she protested, but her voice lacked conviction. Isn't it? When was the last time you actually asked about my life, Miranda? Not what you assumed it was, but what it actually is. She had no answer for that. I chose a different path, I continued. I wanted work that mattered to me, on my own terms. I wanted to raise Zoe in a normal environment, not surrounded by wealth and status and pressure. That doesn't make my choices less valid than yours. Miranda's eyes glistened with unshed tears. I never meant to. I just assumed. And that's the problem, I said gently. You assumed, and I let you, because it was easier than fighting for understanding I wasn't sure you could give. Around us, the gala continued, but in our corner, years of misunderstanding hung in the balance. I didn't know if this moment would bridge the chasm between us or widen it. But for the first time in years, we were seeing each other clearly. As Miranda opened her mouth to respond, I realized this wasn't just about clearing up misconceptions. It was about whether two sisters with fundamentally different values could find common ground after years of judgment and distance. That night marked the beginning of a new chapter in our story, one where truths long hidden were finally coming to light. My name is Eliza Chen, and until my daughter's impromptu speech at that fundraiser, I'd spent nearly 15 years letting my family believe I was the failure of the Wang dynasty, the disappointment, the cautionary tale. Growing up in our household meant growing up with expectations that were never spoken but always felt. My parents had immigrated from Taiwan in the 1970s, bringing with them advanced degrees, relentless work ethics, and dreams that eventually became Wang Medical Technologies, a company that revolutionized portable dialysis machines. Success wasn't celebrated in our home, it was expected. Miranda, 3 years my senior, embodied everything my parents valued. Methodical, practical, and fiercely competitive, she collected achievements like trophies, class valedictorian, Stanford undergraduate with dual majors in economics and political science, MBA from Harvard, and finally, COO of Wang Medical by 30. She married Andrew Phillips, a surgeon from a similarly accomplished family, and they settled in Oak Ridge Hills, an affluent community with the right schools, the right neighbors, and the right opportunities for networking. I was different, from the beginning. While Miranda excelled at memorization and standardized tests, I asked questions that frustrated my teachers. Why does this work? Could it work differently? What if we tried another approach? In a family that valued definitive answers, I was drawn to exploration and possibilities. Eliza lives in her head too much, my mother would say with a sigh to her friends. Miranda, she has both feet on the ground. By high school, the contrast between us was stark. Miranda led debate teams and student government. I spent hours in the computer lab teaching myself programming languages. Miranda attended cotillion and practiced the social graces that would later serve her in boardrooms. I created my first encryption algorithm at 16, more comfortable with code than conversation. When I was accepted to Stanford's computer science program, my parents were pleased but confused. Computers are for supporting real businesses, my father said, not unkindly. Maybe you can work in Miranda's IT department someday. College was where I found my people, others who saw technology not just as tools but as solutions to problems that hadn't been articulated yet. I thrived in that environment, graduating with honors and immediately entering Stanford's PhD program in computer science with a focus on artificial intelligence and data privacy. That's when everything changed. 3 months into my doctoral program, I discovered I was pregnant. The father was David Chen, a brilliant researcher I'd been dating for nearly a year. When I told him about the pregnancy, his response was immediate and unexpected. I can't do this right now, Eliza. My research is at a critical stage. Children were never part of my plan. Just like that, he was gone, leaving me with a decision that would shape the rest of my life. I sat alone in my apartment for 3 days, weighing options, calculating outcomes, trying to apply logic to a situation that defied rational analysis. On the 4th day, I placed 2 calls. The first was to my academic advisor, deferring my program for a year. The second was to Miranda. I still remember her voice, crisp and controlled. You're what? Pregnant, I repeated. About 8 weeks. The silence stretched so long I thought we'd been disconnected. Does anyone else know? She finally asked. Just you and my advisor. I haven't told Mom and Dad yet. Another pause. Don't. What? Don't tell them, Eliza. Not until you've resolved this situation. You know how they feel about family planning and proper timing. This would devastate them. Her words stung, but I couldn't deny the truth in them. Our parents had mapped out their lives with precision. Unplanned pregnancies, single motherhood, these weren't part of the Wang narrative of success. I'm keeping the baby, I said firmly, surprising myself with my certainty. Miranda's sharp intake of breath carried over the line. Eliza, think about what you're saying. Your entire future will include my child. The weeks that followed were a blur of morning sickness, academic paperwork, and Miranda's increasingly frantic attempts to help me see reason. She sent articles about the challenges of single motherhood, statistics on dropout rates for student parents, and thinly veiled warnings about disappointing our parents. When I finally told our parents, their reaction was worse than I'd imagined. My mother cried, not with joy but with shame. My father looked at me with confusion, as if trying to understand how his daughter could have miscalculated so badly. "What about your studies?" he asked. "What about your future?" "This is my future now," I replied, one hand resting on my slightly rounded belly. Miranda sat beside our parents, her expression a mixture of vindication and genuine concern. "Eliza, there are still options. I know a clinic—" "No," I interrupted. "I've made my decision." My father stood abruptly. "Then you've made your bed. Don't expect us to help you lie in it." He left the room, my mother following with one last tearful glance at me. Only Miranda remained, her posture perfect even in crisis. "You're throwing everything away," she said quietly. "Everything Mom and Dad worked for, everything they sacrificed to give us opportunities." I met her gaze steadily. "I'm choosing a different opportunity." That night, I packed my belongings and moved out of university housing, using my savings to rent a small apartment off campus. I withdrew from my PhD program entirely rather than just deferring, a decision that shocked even me. Something fundamental had shifted inside me. The structured, predictable path suddenly seemed confining rather than secure. For the next several months, I supported myself with freelance programming work. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills and allowed me to work from home as my pregnancy progressed. My social circle shrank to a handful of loyal friends who didn't disappear when my life took its unexpected turn. Zoe Elizabeth Chen arrived on a rainy Tuesday in March, a tiny, fierce presence with a full head of dark hair and eyes that seemed to take in everything. The moment the nurse placed her in my arms, I understood that all my calculations about what mattered in life had been using the wrong variables. My parents sent a perfunctory card and a small check. Miranda visited once, bringing designer baby clothes and advice on how to get back on track once this detour was behind me. She held Zoe awkwardly, as if unsure how to interact with something so unpredictable, so human. "You can still salvage your career," she said as she prepared to leave. "Get a master's instead of a PhD. Find a corporate job with good benefits. It won't be what you planned, but it could be stable." I smiled at my sister, exhausted but more certain than I'd ever been. "This is exactly what I planned, Miranda. I just didn't know it until now." The years that followed were both harder and more rewarding than I could have imagined. When Zoe was 6 months old, I founded my first startup from my kitchen table, a small consulting firm specializing in data security for healthcare providers. By the time she was walking, I had 3 employees and a real office. During those early years, contact with my family became increasingly sporadic. My parents, who had planned to retire to Taiwan, accelerated their timeline. Miranda's calls grew less frequent, and when they came, they were filled with subtle comparisons that always positioned me as struggling. "Andrew just made partner at his practice," she would say. "We're looking at vacation homes in Aspen. How are things with you? Is that consulting business staying afloat?" I never corrected her assumptions, partly out of pride, partly because I recognized that Miranda needed to see me as the family failure to validate her own choices, and partly because I had discovered something unexpected. I enjoyed flying under the radar, being underestimated. Without the pressure of family expectations, I was free to take risks, to experiment, to fail and try again. When Zoe was 4, I sold my consulting firm and founded Privacy Shield AI with 2 former colleagues. Our mission was ambitious: to develop artificial intelligence systems that could detect and prevent data breaches before they happened, while maintaining user privacy as a fundamental right, not an afterthought. The first years were lean. We worked ridiculous hours, took minimal salaries, and poured everything back into research and development. I moved us to a modest two-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood that was safe but unfashionable, far from Miranda's manicured suburb. My one non-negotiable was that I would be home for dinner with Zoe every night, no matter what fires needed putting out at work. Our breakthrough came when Zoe was 7. We developed an algorithm that could identify potential security vulnerabilities without accessing the actual content of users' data, a holy grail in privacy technology. Within months, we were fielding calls from major tech companies, healthcare, systems, and government agencies. Success came quickly after that. By the time Zoe was 10, Privacy Shield was a leader in our field, with offices in 3 countries and a client list that included names I once only dreamed of working with. I was invited to speak at conferences, consult on legislation, and advise Fortune 500 companies on data ethics, but very little changed in our daily lives. We moved to a slightly larger apartment in the same neighborhood. Zoe continued attending public school. I drove the same reliable Subaru, not out of financial necessity, but because those choices aligned with my values. I wanted Zoe to grow up understanding that success wasn't measured by possessions or status, but by impact and purpose. Throughout this time, my family's perception of me remained frozen in amber. Miranda still sent Christmas cards featuring her picture-perfect family in coordinated outfits, standing in front of their ever-larger homes. My parents called occasionally from Taiwan, their questions revealing what Miranda had told them. "How is your little business? Are you managing? Okay. Zoe must be getting so expensive now that she's older." I never corrected them, never sent photos of me receiving industry awards or speaking at the White House Summit on data privacy. I never mentioned when Forbes included me on their 40 under 40 list, or when Privacy Shield's valuation passed $100 million. It wasn't humility, exactly. It was self-protection. The moment my family recognized my success, they would try to claim it, measure it against their yardstick, and inevitably find it wanting in some way. Zoe, however, grew increasingly frustrated with this arrangement as she got older. "Why does Aunt Miranda talk to you like that?" she asked after a particularly condescending phone call when she was 12. "Doesn't she know you're kind of a big deal?" I smiled at my daughter's indignation. She knows what I've let her know. Zoe frowned, her expression so serious it made my heart ache. "But that's not fair. She acts like you're some charity case. I heard her telling Grandma that you're doing the best you can with limited resources." "Mom, you donated more to your alma mater last year than Aunt Miranda makes in salary." I sat beside Zoe on our living room couch, trying to find words to explain a dynamic I barely understood myself. Sometimes people need to believe certain things about others to feel secure in their own choices. Aunt Miranda has followed a very traditional path to success. My journey doesn't fit her definition, so she interprets it as failure. "That's messed up," Zoe declared. I laughed. "Yes, it is. But it's also not worth fighting about. I know who I am and what I've accomplished. That's enough for me." But it wasn't enough for Zoe. As she entered her teenage years, she became increasingly protective of me, bristling at family gatherings when Miranda's condescension surfaced, challenging my parents when they expressed disappointment in my limited achievements. "They don't deserve to know the truth," she said once after a particularly tense holiday dinner. "But they don't deserve to make you feel small either." What Zoe couldn't understand, what I was still learning myself, was that no one could make me feel small without my permission. The complicated dance with my family was partially my responsibility. By allowing their misconceptions to stand, I was complicit in the fiction. The question was whether confronting those misconceptions would lead to genuine understanding or simply new ways to be misunderstood. I had almost convinced myself it didn't matter either way when Miranda's invitation arrived. The fundraiser would become a turning point none of us expected. The moment when the carefully maintained walls between my worlds would come crashing down, forcing all of us to face truths we had been avoiding for years. And as my daughter and I walked into that gymnasium, I had no idea that by the end of the evening, Every assumption about my life, my choices, and my definition of success would be challenged not just for my family, but for me as well. Miranda, and I stood in that quiet corner of the gymnasium, the sounds of the gala fading into background noise as 15 years of misunderstanding hung between us. The look on her face shifted from shock to confusion, to something I hadn't seen directed at me since we were children. Respect. "I don't understand," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why would you let me believe you were struggling all these years? Why would you let me treat you like a charity case?" I leaned against the wall, suddenly exhausted. "It wasn't about you, Miranda. Not everything is." "Then what was it about?" Her perfectly manicured hand gestured toward the crowd where people were still buzzing about Zoe's revelation. Pride? Stubbornness? Some twisted need to prove me wrong? I shook my head. It started as self-preservation. By the time Zoe was born, the narrative was already established. I was the disappointment, the one who threw everything away. Correcting that would have meant justifying my choices, proving my worth by your metrics. I didn't want to live that way anymore. Miranda flinched. "So you just let us believe a lie?" "I let you believe what you wanted to believe," I corrected gently. "There's a difference." She opened her mouth to argue, then closed it again. For the first time in our adult lives, Miranda Wang Phillips was speechless. I continued, my voice steady. "When I started Privacy Shield, I was working 80-hour weeks while raising a toddler. I couldn't handle family judgment on top of that. And then, as we became successful, I realized something important. I liked my life exactly as it was. No expectations, no comparisons, no need to display my achievements like badges of honor." "But we're family," Miranda protested. "You shut us out completely." "Did I?" I asked, meeting her gaze directly. "Or did you stop seeing me once I deviated from the path you thought I should take? When was the last time you asked about my work and actually listened to the answer? When was the last time you invited us to your home without an agenda or an audience?" Her silence was answer enough. A staff member approached hesitantly. "Ms. Phillips, the auction is about to begin. They need you on stage." Miranda nodded, visibly gathering her composure. "We're not done with this conversation," she said to me, her voice low. "Come by the house tomorrow. Just you. 1 o'clock. She walked away, back straight, smile perfectly in place as she returned to her role as the evening's gracious host. I watched her go, a complex mix of emotions swirling inside me. Relief that the truth was finally out, anxiety about what would come next, and something unexpected. Hope. I found Zoe at our table, surrounded by admirers. She was handling the attention with grace but looked relieved when she spotted me. "Ready to go?" I asked. She nodded, gathering her things. As we made our quiet exit, several people stopped us. Business cards were pressed into my hands, and invitations were extended. I accepted them politely, but non-committally. Tonight wasn't about networking or opportunities. It was about something far more personal. In the car, Zoe broke the silence first. "Are you mad at me?" I glanced at her as I navigated through the parking lot. "Not mad, but we need to talk about boundaries, Zoe. What happened in there?" "Changed everything," she finished. "In a good way." I sighed. "It changed something, certainly. Whether it's good remains to be seen." "Mom," Zoe's voice was firm beyond her 14 years. "You've spent my entire life teaching me to be proud of who I am, to never hide my light, to stand in my truth. And then I watch you let Aunt Miranda treat you like you're nothing, like your choices made you less than her. It's not right." "Her?" Words hit me with unexpected force. Had I been modeling a contradiction? Teaching confidence while practicing avoidance? "You're right that I shouldn't have let her speak to me that way," I acknowledged. But exposing my professional success doesn't address the real issue between Miranda and me. It's never been about money or status. It's about fundamentally different views on what makes a life valuable. Zoe considered this. So what happens now? Now, I said, pulling onto the highway. We go home. Tomorrow I talk to your aunt. Alone. But this is between sisters, Zoe. You opened the door, which took courage I'm still processing. But I need to walk through it on my own. She nodded reluctantly. I just want them to see you like I see you. I reached across the console to squeeze her hand. How do you see me? She turned to me, her expression earnest. As someone who chose her own path, who built something that matters, who never sacrificed being my mom, even when it would have been easier. She paused. You're the strongest person I know, and they treat you like you're weak. It makes me so angry. Tears stung my eyes, but I blinked them back, focusing on the road ahead. Sometimes the strongest choice is to let people think what they want to think. And sometimes, I admitted, it's to tell the truth, even when it's uncomfortable. When we arrived home, our modest apartment felt different somehow, not smaller, or less than, but intentional. Every piece of furniture, every photograph, every book on our shelves represented choices I'd made consciously, not defaults or expectations. This home reflected our values: comfort over showcase, function over status, warmth over impression. That night, I lay awake long after Zoe had gone to bed, replaying the events of the evening and contemplating what waited for me at Miranda's house tomorrow. Part of me wanted to cancel, to retreat back to the safety of parallel lives. But Zoe's words echoed in my mind. You're the strongest person I know. Maybe it was time to be strong in a different way. The next morning dawned crisp and clear. I dressed carefully, choosing clothes that reflected who I truly was: comfortable dark jeans, a simple blue blouse, minimal jewelry. Professional, but authentic. I wasn't going to war, but I wasn't going to perform either. Want me to come with you? Zoe offered over breakfast, trying to sound casual. I smiled. Nice try. You have study group at the library, remember? I'll pick you up at 4. She sighed dramatically but didn't argue. As I dropped her off, she called after me, Don't let Aunt Miranda make you feel small. I won't, I promised, touched by her fierce protection. Miranda lived in a sprawling colonial in the most exclusive part of Oak Ridge Hills. As I pulled into the circular driveway, I took a moment to appreciate the manicured perfection of her home, the symmetrical topiaries flanking the front door, the gleaming windows, the tasteful seasonal wreath. It was beautiful, unquestionably, but also somewhat impersonal, like a home staged for a magazine shoot rather than lived in by actual humans. Miranda opened the door before I could ring the bell. She'd changed from her power suit to designer jeans and a cashmere sweater, her version of casual, though I suspected the outfit cost more than my entire wardrobe. You came, she said, sounding somewhat surprised. I said I would. She led me through the marble-floored entryway into a sunroom overlooking perfectly landscaped gardens. Tea was already set out on a glass table, alongside a plate of pastries that looked too perfect to eat. Andrew and the boys are at lacrosse practice, she explained, pouring tea into delicate cups. I thought we should talk privately. I nodded, taking the offered cup. Thank you. An awkward silence descended. After all the build-up, neither of us seemed to know where to begin. I waited, letting Miranda gather her thoughts. This was her house, her invitation. Let her set the terms of engagement. Finally, she spoke. You made me look like a fool last night. Not the opening I expected, but classically Miranda, direct and focused on impression management. That wasn't my intention, I said carefully. And technically, it was Zoe who spoke up, not me. She's 14, Eliza. You're her mother. You could have stopped her. I set my teacup down. Actually, I couldn't have, not without causing a scene. And more importantly, not without teaching her that it's okay to let people misrepresent you as long as it keeps the peace. Miranda's eyes flashed. So you're blaming me for what happened? I'm not blaming anyone, I replied, keeping my voice even. I'm acknowledging that we've all played a part in creating this situation. You made assumptions about my life. I allowed those assumptions to stand. Zoe decided she couldn't watch it continue. Now we're here. Miranda stared out at her garden for a long moment. When she looked back at me, her expression had softened slightly. $800 million, Eliza? Really? Despite everything. I laughed. Zoe exaggerated a bit. The actual number isn't public yet, but it's substantial. And you never thought to mention this minor detail to your family? I shrugged. Would it have mattered? Would it have changed how you see me? Or would it just have changed how you categorize me? She frowned. What does that mean? It means, I said carefully, that you've always needed me to be a certain way to validate your own choices. First, I was the dreamer who needed to be more practical. Then I was the cautionary tale, the one who threw everything away for an unplanned pregnancy. If you suddenly found out I was financially successful, I'd just become something else in your narrative. Maybe the lucky one who caught a break, or the workaholic neglecting her child for career advancement. Miranda flinched. That's not fair. Isn't it? When have you ever seen me, Miranda? The actual me, not the version that fits whatever story you're telling yourself? She opened her mouth to object, then closed it again. The silence stretched between us, not quite comfortable, but no longer hostile either. I don't know how to do this, she finally admitted, her voice smaller than I'd heard it in years. I don't know how to be your sister if you're not who I thought you were. The vulnerability in her admission caught me off guard. Miranda had always projected certainty, even when she was wrong. Especially when she was wrong. I'm exactly who I've always been, I said gently. A woman who values meaning over status, who measures success by impact, not acquisition, who chose an unconventional path because it allowed me to be both a mother and a creator on my own terms. But why hide your achievements? Were you punishing us? Punishing me? I considered this carefully. At first, maybe there was an element of that. But mostly, I was protecting myself. Every achievement in our family comes with strings attached. Expectations, comparisons, judgments about what's next. I didn't want to live with those strings anymore. So you just cut us out completely, Miranda said, hurt evident in her voice. No, I corrected. I maintained the relationship you were willing to have. One where I was the lesser sister, the one who needed help and guidance. You never asked about my work with genuine interest. You never invited Zoe and me to visit without an audience or agenda. You never treated me as an equal. My words hung in the air between us. For once, Miranda didn't rush to defend herself or counterattack. She simply sat with the truth, uncomfortable as it clearly was for her. After a long silence, she spoke again. I've always envied you, you know. This was so unexpected that I nearly choked on my tea. You what? Miranda smiled ruefully. You were always so free, so unconcerned with what people thought. You asked questions no one else dared to ask. You saw possibilities where the rest of us just saw rules. She gestured around her perfect sunroom. I did everything right. Every step, every milestone, exactly as expected. And sometimes I look around and wonder if any of these choices were actually mine. I stared at my sister, seeing her clearly perhaps for the first time in our adult lives. Behind the perfect facade, the relentless achievement, the carefully curated social media presence, she was questioning her path just as I had questioned mine. Why didn't you ever say anything? I asked softly. She laughed without humor. And admit weakness? In our family? Besides, what would I have said? Congratulations on your unplanned pregnancy and career derailment, Eliza. I'm actually jealous? Put that way, it did sound absurd. We both laughed, a small moment of genuine connection breaking through years of misunderstanding. For what it's worth, I said, I've envied aspects of your life too. The certainty, the clear path, the support from Mom and Dad. Raising Zoe alone while building a company from nothing. There were days I thought I'd collapse from the weight of it all. Miranda's expression softened. Why didn't you ask for help? Would you have given it without conditions? Without judgment? She didn't answer directly, which was answer enough. We've both been stuck in roles assigned to us, so long ago, I mused. The proper daughter and the rebel, the success and the failure. What if we just stopped? What if we tried to see each other as we actually are, not as characters in some family mythology? Miranda considered this, turning her teacup in her hands. I don't know if Mom and Dad can do that. Their worldview is pretty fixed. I'm not talking about Mom and Dad right now. I'm talking about us, sisters. She met my gaze, vulnerability and hope warring in her expression. I'd like that, but I don't know how to start. I smiled. You already have, by inviting me here, by listening instead of defending, by being honest about your own doubts. And what about you? She challenged gently. Are you ready to be seen? Really seen, not just as the successful entrepreneur or the dedicated mother, but as a whole person, with strengths and weaknesses and everything in between? Her question struck at the heart of something I hadn't fully acknowledged to myself. In hiding my success from my family, I'd also been hiding parts of myself. My ambition, my pride in what I'd built, my occasional doubts and failures. I'd been so focused on avoiding their judgment that I'd denied them the chance to truly know me. I'm ready to try, I said honestly. It won't be easy for either of us. We have decades of patterns to unlearn. But I think it's worth the effort. Miranda nodded, a tentative smile forming. So where do we go from here? We start small, I suggested. Maybe dinner next week? Just the families, no fundraisers, no performances. You can meet the real Zoe, not just your perception of her. I can get to know your boys beyond their lacrosse trophies and SAT prep. I'd like that, Miranda said, and for once, the warmth in her voice seemed entirely genuine. As I drove home later that afternoon, I felt lighter than I had in years. Not because everything was resolved. We had barely scratched the surface of our complicated family dynamics, but because something had shifted fundamentally. A door had opened that had been locked for too long. Zoe was waiting for me when I pulled up to the library, practically bouncing with curiosity. She slid into the passenger seat, immediately peppering me with questions. What happened? What? Did she say? Is she still mad? Are you mad? Did you tell her about the foundation? Breathe, kiddo, I laughed. It was productive. We talked, really talked, maybe for the first time in our adult lives. Zoe studied my face. And we're having dinner at their house next Friday. Just family. Her eyes widened. Seriously? No fundraiser? No charity case narrative? No fundraiser, I confirmed. But the narrative shift will take time. This is just a beginning. Zoe leaned back in her seat, seemingly satisfied. It's about time. As we drove home, I thought about the journey that had brought us here. I had spent years defining myself, in opposition to my family's values, then years hiding my success to avoid their judgment. Neither approach had brought me closer to authentic connection or peace. The path forward wasn't about proving my worth to them or hiding it out of spite. It was about standing firmly in my truth while creating space for others to stand in theirs, even when those truths seemed contradictory. It was about recognizing that we are all works in progress, constantly evolving, constantly learning how to see each other more clearly. That evening, as Zoe and I made dinner together in our modest kitchen, I felt a profound gratitude for this life I had chosen, challenges, triumphs, and all. The measure of success wasn't in the acquisition or the recognition. It wasn't even in the impact of my work, though that mattered deeply. It was in the ability to live authentically, to make conscious choices rather than simply following prescribed paths. It was in raising a daughter brave enough to speak truth to power, even when that power was her own family. And perhaps most importantly, it was in the courage to keep opening doors to connection, even when previous attempts had failed. My sister had spent years telling everyone I had failed in life. My daughter had revealed what I really did for work. But the real revelation wasn't about my career or financial success. It was about the possibility of being fully seen and accepted, not despite our differences, but because of them. The journey wouldn't be easy. Old patterns don't disappear overnight. But for the first time in 15 years, I felt hopeful that my sister and I might find our way back to each other, not as the characters we'd been assigned in our family story, but as the complex, imperfect, authentic women we had become. The week leading up to dinner at Miranda's house was filled with unexpected moments of connection. She called me twice, not to coordinate logistics or establish parameters, but to actually talk. The first call came when she read an article about Privacy Shield in the Wall Street Journal. "They're calling you the quiet revolutionary of data ethics," she said when I answered. Why didn't I know my own sister was changing an entire industry? There was no accusation in her voice, just genuine curiosity. "You never asked," I replied simply. "And I never offered." The second call came after she'd done more research on my company and foundation. "I looked up your TED Talk," she admitted. "You were brilliant. I've watched it 3 times. These small exchanges felt monumental after years of surface-level communication. We were taking tentative steps toward seeing each other clearly, without the distorting lens of comparison or judgment. Friday arrived, and as Zoe and I prepared to leave for Miranda's house, I noticed my daughter seemed uncharacteristically nervous. She changed outfits twice and checked her phone constantly. "What's going on?" I asked as we got into the car. "You're usually not this anxious about family gatherings." She fidgeted with her seatbelt. "It's different now. Before, they didn't know anything real about us. Now they know you're successful, but they still don't really know me." I glanced at her, surprised. "What do you mean?" Zoe stared out the window. "Aunt Miranda's boys are like perfect on paper. Connor's headed to Yale pre-med. Tyler's some math prodigy. And what am I? Just the artsy niece who goes to public school." My heart ached at her words. In my determination to give Zoe a normal childhood, had I inadvertently made her feel less than her cousins? "First of all," I said carefully, "Connor and Tyler are dealing with expectations neither of us can imagine. And second, you are extraordinary, in ways that don't fit neatly on college applications or trophy shelves." She rolled her eyes, unconvinced. "I'm serious, Zoe. Your empathy, your creativity, your willingness to stand up for what's right, these aren't small things. They're enormous. They're the foundation of a meaningful life." As Zoe and I drove home in the early hours of the morning, I felt a profound sense of possibility I hadn't experienced in years. Not just for my relationship with Miranda, but for Zoe's connection to her cousins, for our place within the larger family system. "That wasn't terrible," Zoe admitted, stifling a yawn. "Connor and Tyler are actually pretty cool when they're not being all perfect and superior." I smiled. "People are usually more interesting when you get past the surface." Aunt Miranda seemed different too, less judgy. "We're all trying to see each other more clearly," I said. "It's a process." The following weeks brought more changes than I could have anticipated. Miranda and I established a weekly sister lunch, Sometimes just the two of us. Sometimes with Zoe and the boys. We talked about everything. Work challenges, parenting dilemmas, our evolving understanding of success and fulfillment. The Cousins app idea gained momentum, with video calls and coding sessions becoming regular events. Connor's pre-med perspective, Tyler's mathematical precision, and Zoe's creative approach proved to be a powerful combination. The true test came a month later, when our parents announced they would be visiting from Taiwan. In the past, their visits had been exercises in tension management, with Miranda orchestrating elaborate dinners designed to showcase her family's achievements, while I tried to minimize my presence and protect Zoe from their subtle dismissals. This time, Miranda suggested something different, a casual family gathering at my apartment. When I expressed surprise, she shrugged. They should see you in your element, not just as guests in my home or yours. Besides, she added with a smile, it's time they know who their daughters really are. Both of them. The day of their visit, I found myself uncharacteristically nervous. My apartment, while comfortable and filled with things I loved, wasn't designed to impress. It reflected my values: sustainability over luxury, creativity over convention, function over status. Would my parents see that? Or would they just see evidence of what they'd always believed, that I had settled for less? Zoe sensed my anxiety as I rearranged books for the third time. Mom, stop. Your apartment is great. It's you. That's what I'm worried about, I admitted. She rolled her eyes. If they can't appreciate you by now, that's their problem, not yours. Wasn't that the whole point of this family truth revolution? Her words centered me. She was right, of course. The goal wasn't to finally win my parents' approval by revealing my success. It was to live authentically, to be seen clearly, whether they approved or not. When the doorbell rang, I took a deep breath and opened the door to find not just my parents, but Miranda, Andrew, and the boys as well. They arrived together, a united front. Eliza, my mother said, embracing me with a formality that hadn't softened over the years. Your sister has been telling us some interesting things. My father nodded, his expression unreadable. Very interesting indeed. Miranda gave me an encouraging smile over our mother's shoulder. We had discussed how to approach this visit, agreeing that while I wouldn't hide my achievements, I also wouldn't perform or prove my worth. This was about connection, not validation. I welcomed them into my home, offering tea and the almond. Cookies my mother had always favored. Connor and Tyler immediately gravitated toward Zoe, the three of them huddling over a laptop to show my parents their app progress. My father, always interested in technology, was drawn into their explanation, despite himself. This recognition algorithm, he asked, gesturing to Zoe's code. You developed this yourself? Zoe nodded, not looking up from the screen. It's based on research I've been doing on emotional AI. Mom's company uses similar principles in their privacy protocols. My father turned to me, reassessing. Miranda says your company has revolutionized data security in healthcare. It wasn't quite a question, but I answered it as one. We've made some meaningful contributions. The integration of ethical AI and privacy protection is still evolving, but we're proud of our role in shaping industry standards. You never mentioned any of this, my mother said, a hint of accusation in her tone. You never asked, I replied gently. We've spoken perhaps 10 times in the past 5 years. Each time, you assumed I was struggling, and I let that assumption stand. A flash of hurt crossed her face. Why would you do that? Miranda intervened. Maybe because we've never made it safe for Eliza to be herself. We've always measured her against our yardstick instead of recognizing she was using a different one altogether. Our mother looked taken aback, unaccustomed to Miranda challenging her perspective. What yardstick is that? Impact over status, I explained. Purpose over prestige, balance over sacrifice. Those sound like excuses for lack of ambition, my father remarked, but without his usual dismissive tone. There was genuine curiosity in his voice. Actually, Andrew joined in, Eliza's approach requires more ambition, not less. It's relatively straightforward to follow a prescribed path to conventional success. It's much harder to forge your own way while staying true to your values. My father considered this, looking around my apartment with new eyes, noting the wall of awards I'd never mentioned, the framed patents, the photographs of me speaking at international conferences. "You've built something significant," he finally acknowledged, "in your own way." Coming from my father, this was tantamount to a standing ovation. The day unfolded with more moments of authentic connection than I'd experienced with my parents in decades. They listened as Zoe explained her art-science fusion projects. They asked thoughtful questions about Privacy Shield's work. My mother even shared stories about her early days in America, before success and status became the family's defining metrics. As they prepared to leave, my father paused at the door. "I may have misunderstood your choices," he said, his formal English carrying the weight of profound admission. "Perhaps there is more than one path to a worthy life." It wasn't an apology, but from a man who had never acknowledged being wrong about anything, it was revolutionary. After they left, Miranda stayed behind, helping me clean up while the kids continued working on their project. "That went better than expected," I remarked, placing leftover cookies in a container. Miranda smiled. "They're trying, in their own way." "Because of you," I acknowledged. "You translated for me. You've always been the bridge between me and them." "Maybe that's my role," she mused. "Not the perfect daughter or the successful one, but the connector. The one who helps us all see each other more clearly." "That's a different kind of achievement," I said. "Maybe the most important kind." Later that night, after everyone had gone and Zoe was asleep, I sat on my balcony, looking out at the city lights. I thought about the journey of the past months, from hiding behind assumptions to standing in my truth, from protecting my narrative to sharing it, from isolation to connection. The transformation hadn't come from finally proving my worth, or changing my family's perspective, though both had happened to some degree. It had come from recognizing that authentic connection requires mutual visibility, the courage to be seen and the willingness to truly see others. My sister had told everyone I failed in life. My daughter had revealed what I really did for work. But the real revelation had nothing to do with career success or financial achievement. It was the discovery that beneath our carefully constructed identities and long-held assumptions, we were all seeking the same things: purpose, understanding, and the freedom to evolve. Success, I realized, isn't a destination or an achievement. It's not measured in acquisitions or accolades. She offered a small smile. "Yeah, but they don't exactly impress people at fancy family dinners." I reached over to squeeze her hand. "Tonight isn't about impressing anyone. It's about being authentic, remember? All of us, not just me." When we arrived at Miranda's house, the atmosphere was noticeably different from previous visits. Instead of being directed to a formal dining room set with the good china and crystal, Miranda welcomed us into their family kitchen. Andrew stood at the island, sleeves rolled up, making cocktails. Their sons, Connor and Tyler, were setting a table on the screened porch. Casual, comfortable, intimate. "You came," Miranda said, embracing me with a warmth I hadn't felt in years. She turned to Zoe and hugged her too. "And you, Miss Truth-Teller. Thank you for your courage last week." Zoe looked startled by this reception, but pleased. Andrew approached with drinks. "Club soda with lime for Eliza, right?" he asked, handing me a glass. I was touched he remembered my preference. "And sparkling apple cider for the young ones," he added, giving Zoe a glass with a conspiratorial wink. This small gesture, being seen, being known in our preferences, set the tone for the evening. Dinner was surprisingly relaxed. The conversation flowed naturally, covering everything from Tyler's recent science fair project to Andrew's frustrations. With hospital administration, Miranda seemed genuinely interested in hearing about Privacy Shield's work, asking insightful questions without the competitive edge that had characterized our interactions for so long. So basically, your algorithms act as both shield and bridge at the same time, she summarized, after I explained our approach to secure data sharing between healthcare systems, protecting privacy while enabling collaboration. I nodded, impressed by her quick grasp of the concept. Exactly. The old paradigm treated privacy and accessibility as opposing forces. We're proving they can be complementary with the right architecture. That's why the acquisition was so significant, Andrew commented. You're not just offering a product. You're changing how the entire healthcare industry thinks about patient data. The conversation shifted to Zoe, who had been quietly observing. What about you? Connor asked. Mom says you're into art? Zoe tensed beside me. Yeah, I guess. Digital art, mostly. She's being modest, I interjected. Zoe developed an algorithm that generates digital art based on emotional input. She's combining creative expression with coding in ways I never could have imagined at her age. Miranda leaned forward, intrigued. How does that work? To my surprise and delight, Zoe launched into an enthusiastic explanation of her project. It started as an experiment with facial recognition software. I wanted to capture micro-expressions and translate them into color patterns and shapes. But then I realized I could expand it to process other emotional inputs: heart rate variability, galvanic skin response, even language pattern analysis. Connor and Tyler were genuinely engaged, asking technical questions that Zoe answered with growing confidence. By the time she pulled out her tablet to show examples of the art her program had generated, all tension had evaporated. She wasn't the awkward artistic niece anymore. She was a fellow creator, a problem solver approaching challenges from a different angle. As I watched them interact, I realized something important. In trying to protect Zoe from the pressure and expectations that had defined my childhood, I'd inadvertently denied her the opportunity to be fully known and appreciated by her extended family. My silence about my own achievements had cast a shadow over hers as well. After dinner, Miranda suggested the kids might want to check out the media room while the adults had coffee on the porch. Zoe looked to me, and I nodded encouragingly. The 4 teenagers headed downstairs, their animated conversation about coding languages and neural networks fading as they descended. She's remarkable, Miranda said once they were out of earshot. Truly extraordinary. Thank you, I replied, warmth spreading through me at her genuine admiration of my daughter. I've been thinking a lot this week, Miranda continued, settling into a wicker chair. About why I needed to see you as struggling all these years. Why I couldn't just celebrate your different path. Andrew squeezed her shoulder supportively. They had clearly been having their own conversations about our family dynamics. And? I prompted gently. And I think... She paused, searching for words. I think I was afraid. This wasn't what I expected. Afraid of what? Afraid that if you could succeed on your own terms, without following the prescribed path, without sacrificing your values or your autonomy, then maybe all my sacrifices weren't necessary. She looked out at the garden, visible in the soft landscape lighting. Maybe I gave up parts of myself I didn't need to give up. The vulnerability in her admission took my breath away. For the first time, I saw clearly how my choices had challenged not just our family's expectations, but Miranda's entire worldview. I never meant to make you question your path, I said softly. She turned back to me, eyes bright with unshed tears. But that's just it. Maybe I needed to question it. Maybe we all do periodically. Not to change everything, but to make sure we're living deliberately, not just fulfilling expectations. Andrew took her hand. Miranda's been reassessing some things, he explained. We both have. The boys will be in college soon, and suddenly we're looking at each other across a very clean, very quiet, very perfect house, wondering what's next. Andrew's thinking about switching to part-time clinical work so he can teach, Miranda said. And She hesitated. I'm considering stepping back from Wang Medical to start a non-profit focused on healthcare access in underserved communities. I stared at them, processing this unexpected revelation. That sounds completely unlike the Miranda and Andrew I thought I knew. Miranda laughed, a genuine sound I hadn't heard in years. Well, maybe you never really knew us, just like we never really knew you. Or maybe we're all evolving, I suggested, finding new ways to express our values as our circumstances change. Andrew nodded thoughtfully. The paths we choose at 25 don't have to define us at 45. I think that's what your story reminded us, Eliza. There's always another chapter to write. We talked for hours as the evening deepened around us, not just about career changes or achievements, but about hopes, regrets, the challenges of parenting, teenagers, the unexpected joys and sorrows of midlife. We shared stories we'd never told each other. Miranda's miscarriage between Connor and Tyler, my panic attacks during Privacy Shield's early years, Andrew's brief depression after his father's death. Around midnight, we realized the kids had been suspiciously quiet for hours. We found all four of them in the media room, huddled around Zoe's tablet, deep in conversation about an app they were apparently designing together. It combines Connor's interest in medical diagnostics with Zoe's emotional recognition algorithm. Tyler explained excitedly when we inquired. We're calling it Emotion Scan. It's just a concept right now, Zoe added. But Connor thinks it could help doctors identify patients who are minimizing pain or symptoms because of cultural factors or stoicism. I exchanged glances with Miranda, both of us trying not to look too pleased or surprised by this unexpected collaboration. It's the continuous process of aligning your outward life with your inner values, of building connections that allow for growth and change, of finding the courage to stand in your truth while creating space for others to stand in theirs. The path I'd chosen hadn't been easy. Building a company while raising a child alone, navigating family dynamics that threatened to diminish me, fighting for recognition in an industry dominated by different voices. These challenges had shaped me, strengthened me, sometimes nearly broken me. But they had also led me here, to this moment of clarity and connection I wouldn't trade for any conventional definition of success. As I watched the city lights, I thought about all the people out there measuring themselves against someone else's yardstick, hiding their light to make others comfortable, sacrificing authenticity for acceptance. I wished I could tell them what I had finally learned, that the most powerful legacy we can create isn't built on others' expectations, but on our own deepest truths. My phone buzzed with a text from Miranda. Thanks for today, for everything. We have a lot of catching up to. Do, little sister. I smiled, typing back. One authentic conversation at a time. And that, I realized, was the true measure of success, not in grand revelations or dramatic transformations, but in the small, consistent choices to move toward authenticity and connection, even when those choices are difficult, even when the path isn't clear. My sister had told everyone I failed in life. My daughter had revealed what I really did for work. But the most important revelation was the one I had finally embraced within myself. That a life lived true to your own values is never a failure, no matter how it appears to others. And that genuine connection begins not with proving your worth, but with the courage to be fully, unapologetically seen. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe. And turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from you,